today, Perek HaMoitzi Ayin, which will discuss various different shiurim regarding the Malacha of Haitzah on Shabbos. HaMoitzi Ayin, one that's Moitzi, that takes out wine from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah. What's the shear of wine? The minimum size, the minimum amount that is of wine to be chayiv. Kidei mezigas hakais. In order to dilute with water this wine. As we'll see in the Gemara, that we're talking over here about diluting 3/4 water and 1/4 wine. And what kind of a kais are we talking about? We're talking about a kais that can hold a revius. So that means that this is 1/4 of a revius of wine that will be diluted with 3/4 of water. And this is because in those times, the wine was extremely strong and you couldn't drink it without diluting it. The next thing, cholov, milk. Kedei gemiyah, the amount of 1 gulp of milk. Dvash, honey. Kedei litein ala kosis, in order to have enough to place on a wound. Rashi here brings 2 pshatim, whether this refers to a wound in an animal and horses and camels, and it was used for that purpose, or another pshat that refers to a wound by people. So although honey, of course, is used for human consumption, so why wouldn't we give the usual shear that there is when a person would eat or drink honey? But since this is a smaller shear, and it could be used for this as well, so this is the minimum shear to be chayiv. Shemen, the shear for oil, is kedei lasoch ever cotton, enough to apply to a small limb of a baby, as we'll see in the Gemara. The Gemara will discuss an ever cotton, whether it's from an adult or from a baby. But if it's enough of an amount to apply on a wound or on a limb of a baby, that's the minimum chiyuv, the minimum shear for the chiyuv. Mayim, water, kedei loshuf behem mesakila, enough in order to apply to a bandage that's used on the eyes. V'shar kala mashkin, all other mashkin, all other liquids, b'revius. The shear is a revius, which is 1/4 of a lug. V'chol ha'shoivchen, and all other wastewater, b'revius. Their shear is also for the amount of revius. The Gemara will explain what wastewater is useful for. Rab Shimon argues and says, Kulan b'revius. All of the different liquids mentioned here in the Mishnah, their shear is a revius, not the smaller amounts that the Mishnah mentioned over here, whether regarding the honey, oil, and so on, or the water. The shiurim of all of them is always a revius. V'loi nemru kol ha'shiyurim halalu elo lamatzniyayin. The shiurim mentioned over here in the Mishnah only refers to people that actually are storing this amount. If they store this amount for this particular use, whether to apply to a aver of a child or to a wound or so on, so then that shear will be enough to be chayiv. But if it doesn't have at least that minimum amount, then even if he stores it and we see that he wants to use it, he won't be chayiv. So as Rashi points out over here, Rab Shimon is arguing with what it said in the previous Mishnah, that when it comes to an individual that stores any particular amount, the very fact that he's storing this amount is a reason to be mechayivim, regardless of what that shear is. But here Rab Shimon is saying that even a person that's actually storing a certain amount, there has to be a certain minimum that it has a use for something. The fact that he is storing it is not enough. This is another pshat in what Rab Shimon is saying, a bit different than what we learned yesterday, the way the Gemara described before, how Rab Shimon is arguing on the previous Mishnah. Let's go weiter. Tana, we learned in a Braisa, Kedei mezigas kais yofe. When it says in the Mishnah, the amount of wine is in order to dilute in a cup with water, we're talking about a kais yofe, a significant kais. Umay kais yafe, what's considered to be a kais yafe? Kais shel bracha. The kais used for bracha, whether for benching or in other cases for a mitzvah. So there's a halacha of kais shel bracha, which we learned about in the Gemara in Brachas. There are all kinds of conditions in order that the cup should be fit to be used for the mitzvah, for the bracha, as Rashi here quotes some of them. So this is the size of the kais that we're talking about, which, as we'll see in a moment, is a kais that has the size of a revius. Rav Nachman, Amar Rabba bar Avuah, kais shel bracha tzarich sheyehei by roiva revius. So this kais shel bracha has to have 1/4 of a quarter of a lug, a quarter of a revius of wine. Kedei sheyimzegenu v'yamad al revius. So when you dilute this wine with 3/4 of water, it'll be the size of a revius. Rava said, we could see this also from what it said in our Mishnah. Hamoitzi yayin, the shear of taking out wine, is kedei mizigas kais, the amount to dilute the wine in a cup of water. Tani Allah, and we learned in the Braisa on this, kedei mizigas kais yofe, the amount of a kais yofe, as we just mentioned. The Katani Seife, in the Seife of the Mishnah it says, V'shar kol mashkin b'reviyas. All mashkin, all liquids, their shear is a revius, besides those particular ones that the Mishnah spells out regarding dvash, shemen, and mayim, that they may have a smaller shear because it be used for some other purpose that's smaller. Otherwise, all mashkin are a revius. So from this we understand, when the Mishnah says kedei mizigas hakais, it refers to a kais that after you dilute it with water is going to be a revius. Rava l'taimei, and Rava follows his opinion. Rava said, Kol chamre, any wine, the leidori al chat tlas maya, which is not diluted, 1 part of wine and 3 parts of water, so 3/4 water, lav chamrehu. It's not wine fit for drinking. As I mentioned before, the wine in those times was extremely strong and it had to be diluted with 3/4 of water. Omar Abaye disagrees. Shtei tshuvis bedover. There are 2 questions or 2 answers we could say on Rava's pshat here. Chode, one question is Ditnan. We learned in a Mishnah. This is a Mishnah in Masechta Nida that discusses various different colors and shades of red that are relevant to know regarding the dam of a nida, the blood of a nida, whether it is blood or not. So one of the things it mentions over there is Vahamazug shnei chalkei mayim. When you have wine which is diluted with 2 parts water, ve'echad yayin, and 1 part wine, min hayayin ashiraini, from the yayin, from the wine that comes from the city called Shadain. So it's diluted 1/3 wine and 2/3 water. So right over here you see that the way to dilute the wine is not 3/4 water and 1/4 wine, but only 1/3 and 2/3. That's the first question. Another question on the pshat here in the Mishnah that we said that we're talking about a person that's might see 1/4 wine, which will then be diluted with 3/4 water. Mayim bechad u'mitzdarfen. The water is still in a separate jug, and you are just carrying the 1/4 of wine that has not been combined yet with the water. It hasn't been diluted with the water, and it's going to combine to the shear, and you'll be chayiv. How could you say that this is the shear of 1/4 of wine, and it's only because it will be diluted, is it mitzdaref, but it hasn't been diluted yet? Amalei Rava, so Rava responds to both questions. This, that you bring me a Mishnah where it mentions that there's 2 parts water and 1 part wine. Min hayayin ashiraini. That's talking about yayin ashiraini. Min hayayin ashiraini, it's read together. Min hayayin ashiraini, which is from this wine coming from this place of Shadain. Yayin ashiraini l'chud. The wine that comes from this place is different. It's different than the regular wine. Why? The rafi. It's a weaker wine. It doesn't need to be diluted so much. All other wines does have to be diluted 3/4 water and 1/4 wine. But this wine is weaker wine, and it's enough if it's diluted with 2/3 water. Inami, another point is, Hasa Mishum Chazusa. There in that Mishnah, we're not discussing about how wine is diluted to be fit for drinking. There, we're discussing the shade of the red, the color red of the wine, to bring it as an example regarding the color of red that there is by a dam nida to know if it's tummy or not. So if it would be diluted any further, it wouldn't be as red, and it's not a good example to be used for the color that the Mishnah is trying to explain there. So it's only talking about the color, not about what is fit for drinking. Aval taime, for the taste, to be able to drink the wine, boitfei, has to be diluted with more water. The second question, with the ka'amrit, the question that you asked, mayim bechad u'mitzdarfen, the water is separately in a jug, and this person only took out the wine that will be diluted later, and then it could be mitzdaref to the shear of a revius. You don't even have a revius together yet. And says Rava, le'inyin Shabbos midi d'choshev be'inon. Regarding the malach of Eitzah on Shabbos, what's needed over here is, the minimum amount required for him to be chayiv is that it should be something significant, something that has a use, significant for a use. V'hanami hachoshev. The very fact that this is the minimum amount that could be used to then dilute and fill a cup of a revius, it makes it significant enough to be chayiv with carrying this. Tane, we learned in Abraise, Yaveish bekazayis. Wine that became congealed, the shear is the amount of the size of a kazayis, of an olive size. That's the minimum amount to be chayiv. Divrei Rab Nosson, this is the words of Rab Nosson. Now the reason why Rab Nosson comes to this shear of a kazayis, as we'll see soon in the Gemara, because when you have wine, which is a revius, and it congeals, you'll end up with congealed wine that's a kazayis. Wine which is a revius, the amount of a revius is about the size of an egg and a half or something in that area. When it congeals into a kazayis is about a half an egg or maybe even a third of an egg. So when it congeals, it goes down in size into a kazayis. Wine which is congealed cannot be used to be combined, to be diluted with water. So therefore, a reva revius, a quarter of a revius, would not be enough to be chai for the haitzah. So wine which is congealed, it has to be from an amount of wine which was actually a full revius. And therefore we come to this measurement of a kazayis, because wine of a revius which is congealed is a kazayis. Divrei Rab Nosson. So this is Rab Nosson's opinion. Amar Rav Yosef, said Rav Yosef, Rab Nosson, Rav Yosef, Rab Yehuda, Amru Davar Echad. Rab Nosson and Rab Yosef, Rab Yehuda both said the exact same point. Rab Nosson Hada Maran. Rab Nosson is the point that we just learned, that the liquid of the wine, when it becomes congealed, it will be in the amount of a kazayis. If it was when it was a liquid, it was a revius. When it becomes congealed, it will be a kazayis. That's what Rab Nosson said. And Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda says the same point. The Tanya we learned in Abraise. Rabbi Yehuda said, Shisha dvarim mikule Beishamai. He reported 6 different cases where Beishamai was lenient, umichumre Beis Hillel, and Hillel was stringent. Unlike usual, where Beis Hillel is the one that's mekel, is lenient, and Beishamai is the one that's machmer, Rabbi Yehuda reported 6 halachas that it was the other way around. What was one of them? Beishamai, dam nevela, the blood that comes from a dead carcass, which is tomei, Beishamai mitaren. Beishamai says the tumah is only on the animal itself, on the flesh of the animal, but not the blood. The blood will be toher. Rashi here brings 2 pshatim, whether toher means completely toher, or it only means that it does not have the same level of tumah as the flesh itself, it has a lower level of tumah. Or Beis Hillel mitamen. Beis Hillel say even the blood is also tomeh. On this, Amar Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda, Af keshetimu Beis Hillel, even when Beis Hillel said that the blood of the animal is tomeh, so the reason why they said the blood is tamei is because the blood could be compared to the flesh itself. Why is that? Because it becomes congealed. So leitimu elabidam sheyesh by revius. They were only metame by blood that has the minimum amount of revius. Because even when it becomes congealed, it'll be the minimum size of a kazayis, which is the minimum amount that causes tumah. So what do we see over here? Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda is saying the same point. When you have a liquid that is the amount of a revius, when it congeals, it's going to be the amount of a kazayis, exactly like Rabbi Nosson said. So the Gemara responds to this, Amar Abaye, no, we can't compare. Before we were talking about wine, now we're talking about blood. It's not the same thing. Dilme loihi. There's no comparison here. When did Rab Nosson say what he said here? In the case of blood, the boy revius, that it's necessary to have the amount of a revius in order that when it's congealed, it will be a kazayis. Ella, again, Rab Nosson, that is. We're talking about Rab Nosson, which is talking about wine, not about blood. So when did Rab Nosson say regarding wine that you have to have the amount of a revius, so that when it becomes congealed, it'll be a kazayis? Ella beyayin the kolish. Talking about wine, which has more of a watery substance. So therefore, it doesn't congeal that fast. And once it congeals, it loses a lot of its volume, and it will be only a kazayis. From you're gonna have to have a larger amount of a revius to have the amount of a kazayis once it congeals. Avo bedam de samich, but blood, which is a thicker substance, kazayis, to get blood congealed, a kazayis, leboy revius, maybe you don't need so much, you don't need a revius, even less of a revius. Once it congeals much quicker, it would still be a kazayis. So there's no comparison. Or the Gemara says we can say the same point, but the other way around. Inami, possibly. At kind of like Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda Hassam. When did Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda say over there regarding the case of blood, the kizayis sagile berevius, that once it's congealed, in order to get it to be a kizayis, it'd be enough if when it was in a liquid form. It was only a revius. Ele bedam de samich, regarding blood, which is a thicker substance, the amount of revius is enough to have a kizayis in it once it's congealed. Avayayin the kolish, but wine, which is a watery substance, and it doesn't congeal so quickly, kizayis have a yaisim revius. In order to get the amount of a kizayis once it congeals, you're going to need to have more than a revius when it was still a watery substance, when it was still liquid. V'chimapik pachas mekizayis l'chayiv, and therefore, even if someone is mitzi less than a kizayis of this wine, once it congeals, he'll still be chayiv, because even less than a revius, when it was liquid, again, even less than a kazayas, that is, once it's congealed, even if it's less than a kazayas, when it was liquid, it was a revius. It takes a revius to congeal to become even less than a kazayas. If when it congeals it's a kazayas, possibly, regarding wine, which is more of a watery substance, when it was liquid, it was more than a revius. So therefore, we can't compare the case of blood to the case of wine. It's a different kind of a substance. Wine is more liquidy and watery, and the blood is more of a thicker substance, and therefore no comparison. Going to the next case of the Mishnah, Cholov Kedei Gmiya. Comes to milk, the amount is a gulp of milk. Hibayaluhu. So the Gemara asks a technical question here regarding the spelling of this word. Kedei Gmiya or Kedei Gmiya? Do we spell it with an aleph or do we spell it with an ayin? Amar Rav Nachman by Yitzchak, Hagmi'ini no mat mayim mikadech. It says there, when Yitzchak tells Rivka to give him to drink from the water, so he uses the term Hagmi'ini with an aleph. So we see it should be spelled with an aleph. Although in most places it's spelled with an ayin, but the Gemara here says that the right spelling is with an aleph. The Gemara now will ask a few similar questions regarding the spelling. The question was also asked regarding the word garinin. Garinin or garinin? Is it spelled with an aleph or with an ayin? The translation of garinin are pits. So how do you spell this word? And we will minimize from his value. So minimize, we will take away. That's what the word v'nigra here means. Similarly, a pit, as Rashi says, is something that you take out and you throw out when you eat the fruit. So therefore, the word garinin with an ayin comes from the word v'nigra. Another question, the question was asked, the word oimemais, which refers to coals, coals that are dimmed. So the word is spelled with an aleph or an ayin. Amar Yitzchak bar Avdimi, arozim loy amamuhu began Eden. The cedar trees did not darken him in Gan Eden, in Gan Elakim, that is. So we see amamuhu, it refers to the dim and the darkness with an ayin, not with an aleph. One more, the Gemara asks, ma'amtzin tanan. Do we read the word ma'amtzin with an aleph or ma'amtzin with an ayin? This is in a Mishnah where it talks about closing the eye of a person that passed away on Shabbos. So is it read with an aleph or an ayin? There's a clear pasuk where it says one closes his eyes and not to see anything evil, and it's written with an ayin. We learned in Abraisa, if you are carrying out on Shabbos the milk from an animal, cow's milk for example, kedei gmiya. So the amount is kedei gmiya, the gulp of milk, like it said in the Mishnah. Chalav shel isha, the milk of a woman, a human milk, v'loven shel beitze, that is, or the white of the egg. What's the minimum amount of this? Kedelitin b'mishife shel killer. In order to mix it into the ointment that's placed on the patch or on the bandage of an eye. So this is ordinarily used for this purpose, so therefore that's the shear. Killer, this patch of the eye, this bandage, kedei lashav b'mayim, enough to used with water, and it's used for 2 eyes. That's the minimum amount. Boy Ravashi asked the question, Kidei Shifa, the amount of the ointment that's used for this killer, for this bandage, is the minimum amount what's used, the actual ointment that's used to be applied on this bandage, that's the shear? Or perhaps it has to be a bit more, because when a person is applying it, some of it gets stuck to his hands, and therefore not all of it goes onto the bandage, and therefore he uses a bit more. So is the shear perhaps also including that little bit more that will get stuck to his hands? Teiku, the Gemara does not resolve this. Dvash, going on in the Mishnah, we learned about honey, kedei litin ala kosis, to place on a wound. Tone, we learned in a braise, kedei litin al pi kosis, to place it on the P, on the opening of the wound. So the Gemara wants to now understand what this means. Boy Ravashi, so Ravashi asked the question. Al kosis, when we say here on the wound, apuma de kula kosis, so it refers to the surface and the opening of the entire wound. That's what pi kosis means in this braisa. Oidilma, or perhaps amurshe kama de kosis, on the outer layer of this wound. In other words, where there's an opening of the wound, where's the pus, the opening of the wound, that's where you place the honey. And hudrana, again, amurshe kama de kosis, la fuke hudrana de loy, excluding the surrounding areas of the wound where you don't place the honey, and therefore it doesn't have to have the amount to be placing it on the entire wound. Take Gemara doesn't resolve this. Now we're going to have a very interesting piece of Gemara going through various different things in the world that the Eibusha created and what's the purpose of their creation. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Kol ma shabara kadosh baruch hu ba'ilamai. Everything that the Eibusha created in this world, lo bara davar echad levatola. He didn't create anything for no reason. Everything is created for a purpose. How many times did the Rebbe quote this Gemara and apply it to so many different things in the world, in life, where a person looks at things and sees that it seems like they serve no purpose whatsoever. And yet, everything in the world has its purpose. Let's take a look over here what the Gemara says right now. Shablul. What is the purpose of the Eibusha creating a shablul, which is a snail? Lekosis. This is used to be placed on a wound, to heal a wound. Barazvuv, the Eibusha creates a fly, litzira, in order to be placed and to heal a bite of a tzira, of a bird, or some kind of a bird, or maybe a wasp that bites a person. Yitush, the Eibusha created a mosquito, lenochash, to place on a bite of a snake. Nochash, a snake is created, lechafafis, in order to heal a person from chafafis, a kind of skin condition, boils on the skin. Smamis, the Eibusha created a type of lizard, la'akrav, to heal from the bite of a scorpion. Now the Gemara goes back, as the Bach over here explains in Nais Gimel, Nochash lechafafis heichi yavid. What do you do with using a snake for chafafis, for a shchin, for some kind of a skin condition a person has? Ma'isi chada uchma, you bring one that's black, v'chada chivre, one that's white, v'shalkiluhu, and you cook it well in a pot, v'shaifile, and then you apply it to this skin condition. Okay, we already had these things in the Gemara before, and we know already what it says, that nishtanu ativim, and to apply this today is not necessarily going to work. The Marsha points out regarding this Gemara that the Gemara is not really giving us a full explanation why the Eibush created all of these things, because ultimately you could still ask the question, what's the purpose of the akrav? It didn't explain that. It didn't explain what's the purpose of the tzira. It's only explaining what's the purpose of these other things to heal the bite of the tzira or the bite of the akrav and so on. But it doesn't. There's no full explanation over here. So the Marsha says the Gemara is not really attempting to give an explanation for every single thing that's created. Some things have an obvious purpose, including something like a nachash and an akrav, which bite. So their purpose is to bite and harm those that deserve a punishment or those that have to be eliminated. That's obvious. But the Gemara here wants to explain certain tiny creatures that seem to serve absolutely no purpose. Like, for example, a snail or a lizard that has absolutely, you see no positive or negative, constructive or destructive cause that it serves. So therefore the Gemara explains what are they doing in this world. And therefore the Gemara shows it does have a certain purpose. It does accomplish something. There's a similar idea that the Rebbe brings in a Sikha b'negei to Makas Tzfardeya. There's a medrash that says that if not for Makas Tzfardeya, the Eibishter would not be able to punish Parei. There's something unique about the Makkah of Tzfardeya that stands out from all the other Makkahs. So this is a Sikha in Chelik Chofal of Parshas Va'era. So the Rebbe asks the question, what's so unique about Tzfardeya as opposed to everything else, all the other of the 9 Makkahs? And the Rebbe says that the point is Tzfardeya, the frog, is an entity that exists in the world that has no positive purpose seemingly and no negative purpose. It doesn't bother anybody. It doesn't provide anything, any positive benefit to anybody. So what's this existence in the world? It seems to be existing without any purpose. When the Tzfardeya comes along and contributes to the Makkah of Tzfardeya, to show the greatness of the Eibishter, to bring this makeh. So this proves and this demonstrates how even the tzfardeya is created for a purpose. Similar to the point that the Marsha says in the Gemara there. Sagt the Gemara weiter, Toner Rabbanon, we learned in Abraisa, Chamisha Eimesein. There are 5 cases of fear where there's an Eimas Cholosh al Gibar, the fear of one that's weak upon the one that's more mighty. And they are as follows. Eimas Mavgia Alari, the fear of a Mavgia, which is some kind of a small creature, but it can make a very loud noise, and even a lion becomes afraid of it. It thinks that there's some large creature that's coming to attack it. Eimas Yitush Alapil, the fear of a mosquito is upon the elephant, because the mosquito goes into the nose of the elephant and annoys it, so he's afraid of these mosquitoes. Eimas Smamis Ala Akrav, the fear of the lizard is on the scorpion, because the lizard goes into the ears of the akrav and annoys it. Eimas Snunis Ala Nesha, the fear of a snunis, which is a kind of a smaller bird, upon the eagle, which is a large bird, and also because the bird goes into its the small bird goes into its wings, and it doesn't allow it to fly. Eimas Kilbis Alav Yasan, the fear of a kilbis, which is a really tiny creature, a small fish, upon the Lav Yasan, also because it goes into its nose and it annoys it. So here we see that Eibishter creates things that are small, but nevertheless they serve a purpose, and they even other larger and more mightier creatures are afraid of them. Rav Yudah Marav brought a source from this. Maikra, it says in the pasuk, Hamavlig shoid al eiz. Shoid, which over here the Gemara Darshan says referring to someone which is downtrodden, someone which is smaller. So his fear is upon those that are mighty. Zakt the Gemara weiter. Amar Rab Zeira. So there's the Bach here is guidance in the Gemara. Ashkechei le Rav Yehuda da have koya pischa de bechamua. I encountered Rav Yehuda that was standing at the doorpost of his father-in-law, and I saw that he's very happy and open for me to ask him questions. I can ask him anything about that goes on in the entire world, and he'll answer me. So he asked Rab Zeira, that is, asked Rab Yehuda, my time izi mazgim bereisha v'hoda imri. Why is it in the flock of the animals, first in the front go the goats, and behind them come the sheep? Why is that their teva, their nature? So he answered him, kibriyasa shalaylam. It's the same in the way, the order of creation. Bereisha chashaycha, first was ereh, first was darkness, and then v'hoda nahira, and then vayihi baiker, then came light. So this nature in the world is resembling this nature of creation right from the beginning. This is something which is brought in Chassidus in many places. Bereisha chashaycha v'hoda nahira. The entire creation is created first with a tzimtzum, with a helen, where the Eibishter conceals his presence and allows for the world to emerge as an independent existence. And then in the world we're able to draw light and introduce the presence of the Eibishter back into the world. And so too in every person's individual life. Many things, many revelations and accomplishments in a person's life have to come first with challenges and chsheicha and hardships and darkness, and that brings about light. So the Gemara here is actually a source of encouragement. When a person sees a matzav of darkness, he knows that this is bereisha, this is just at the beginning, but behind there's a greater light of revelation that's going to come. Sagt the Gemara weiter. Amalei. We're holding where it says my time. So now the Gemara is going to go through many different things that there are amongst the animals and so on. If you take a look in the Marsha here, the Marsha says that all of these things in the Gemara could be also understood as a mashal on Yidden, a mashal on Teire, a mashal on the relationship between Yidden and Goyim, and so on. It's a big arichas here in the Marsha, and he explains this all as a mashal. Just like this first thing we learned over here about the way the goats and the sheep walk, it's all a mashal for the existence of the world and so on, and the chayas of the Eibishter in the world. The same is also true regarding all the rest of the things that the Gemara says here. So he asked him the following question. My time hani mechasyon v'hani megalyan. What's the reason why that the sheep are covered with a tail and the goats are not covered with a tail, have no tail? So he answered him, Hani the machasina minayu, the sheep that we share their wool and we make clothing from them, we cover ourselves with their wool. So machasya, so the Eibusha gave them a tail to be covered. V'hani the loy machasina minayu, the goats, we do not use goats here to make clothing. Megalian, so they do not have a tail, it's uncovered. My time he asked him, what's the reason? Gamle zutig nufsei, a camel has a short tail. So he answered him, Mishum the ochel kisi, because it's the nature of the camel to eat thorns, and therefore if he's going to have a long tail, his tail is going to get entangled in the thorns, that is. My time tura ariche gnufte. Why does an ox have a long tail? So the answer is Mishum de dayer ba'agmi, because he lives in swamps, ubayele karkushi baki, and he needs a long tail to hit the mosquitoes that are bothering him. My time, what's the reason? Karna de kamtzer achicha. The antennas of the grasshoppers are soft. So he answered him, Mishum de dairi bechilfi, because these grasshoppers live in grass. V'ikashye, and if it's going to be hard and stiff, nadye will move and break, umisavra, and they become blind. The vision of the grasshoppers is dependent on their antennas. If you want to blind a grasshopper, pull out its antennas. What's the reason that the eyelids of a chicken, so the bottom eyelid goes on top of the top eyelid, unlike all other creations where it's the other way around? So the answer is the dairi adafi, because they live on rafters and they live high up, and therefore the ayel kitra, if the smoke that goes up and will enter into their eyes, misavra, they will become blind. So the Eibusha created the eyelids in a way that it covers over, that it shouldn't make them blind. Now he asked them regarding different Aramaic words, what's the meaning of these words? Dasha, what's the meaning of the word dasha, which means a door? Derech sham, it's a way to enter through there. Darga, which is the word in Aramaic for a ladder. Derech gag, the way up going to a roof. Maskulisa, which means a certain kind of spice. It's a combination of masai tichleda, when will the spice finish? Rashi here has two pshatim. One pshat is a person is worried when he's not going to have any spices. What is he going to eat? His food will have no taste. Or another pshat, since the spices are not used that often, in other words, it's used a little bit at a time, so a person is always has enough of it. He says, when will it finish? He has it for a very long period of time. Beisa, a house in Aramaic. Boy ve'esiv ba, I will come and sit in it. Biksa, which refers to a smaller hut. Bei aksa, it's a place which is too small for a person to live in it. Aksa, it's narrow, it's small for a person. Kufsa, there's a few pshatim here. One of the pshatim is it's a kind of a barrel that you can use to sit in it. Kuf ve'sev, if you turn it upside down, you can sit on it. Livni, bricks. Livnei bani, you build with it a house for future generations, for your children's children. Hutza, is kinds of twigs or thorns and things like that can be used for a gate. Chatzitza, its purpose is just to create a separation. Chatzva, a jug that can be used to draw water. Shechaitziv, so it means shechaitziv mayim and anar, that you draw water from the river. That's the meaning of the word chatzva. Kuza, which is a smaller jug. Kozeh, when a person sees a kuza, he says to his friend, oh, this amount you can give me, you can afford to give me this amount. Shutisa, which is a branch of a hodos. Shutisa, shtusa, that is. This is something that then the custom was, they used it to juggle, as we know the famous Gemara, when we get to juggling that Rab Shmuel by Yitzchak, I believe it was, that used this to juggle by a chasana to bring the simcha to a chasana and kala. So it's the behavior of a shtus that is usually done with this branch of hadas. Mashichla. This is a vessel that's used to wash yourself from it. Mashikula, it's a large vessel that everybody washes themselves from it. Mashchilta is also a vessel that people wash themselves from it, but it's a smaller vessel that only prominent people wash themselves from it. Mashia kalsa, it's designated, for example, like a kala, a bride, to wash themselves from this. Asisa is the vessel that's used to crush in it. Chasirta, it's a vessel that has a cavity that you can crush in it. Buchna, buchna is the tool that you use to crush. Boiva kena, come and let me bang you, let me hit, let me crush with this. Levusha, what is the word levusha, which refers to the outer garment that a person wears? Loi busha. Now, if a person wears this, he's not embarrassed. As Rashi says, it covers the undergarments or any other garments that may not be so respectable. Glima is yet another outer garment that covers the person completely and even conceals the shapes of his limbs. Shanasa by kagailim. A person becomes like one block of wood, the shape of his body, when he wears this glima. Gulsa. Gulsa is a more choshev kind of clothing that a person wears. Gali ve'esif. When a person wears this garment, he doesn't want to sit on it, and that it shouldn't get dirty. He uncovers, he lifts it up, and he sits down. Puria, a bed in Aramaic, is called Puria. Shaparim v'rabnala. This is the place where a person procreates and has children. Bor zinka, Bair zinka, that is, an empty pit. Bair zeh naki. It means this pit is clean. Sudra, the word sudra is a handkerchief which was used then as a head covering. Talmidei Chachamim, today all people wear a yarmulke as a head covering, was called a sudra. Said Hashem liyireyav. This is a secret of the Eibishter for those that fear him. A padna, which refers to a palace of a king. A pischa dain. Everybody comes to this door, everybody comes over here to get judged by the king or to serve the king and so on. Okay. Tana Rabbanan, we learned in a Braise, Shloisha. There are three, Kozmanshem Askinen, the older they get, Meisifim Gvura, they become mightier. The Elohein, and these are the three, dog, nachash, and a chazer. A fish, a snake, and a chazer, and a pig. Going to the next thing in the Mishnah, we learned in the Mishnah, Shemen, Kedei Losoch Eva Cotton. The amount of oil, the minimum amount of oil to be mitzi, to be chayiv on Shabbos, is to be used to apply to a small limb. So it was said by the yeshiva of Rabbi Yanai, Shemen kidei losoch eva cotton shell cotton. The amount is to apply to the limb, a small limb of a small baby, ben yoima, even 1 day old. That's how small the amount is enough to be chayiv. Meisvei, the Gemara asks from what we learned in Abraise, it says, Shemen kidei losoch eva cotton, the cotton ben yoima. Oil to be used to anoint, to apply to the aver of a cotton, and then it says cotton ben yoimai, the cotton which is a ben yoimai. So it sort of says it as two different things, aver cotton and then cotton ben yoimai. My love, don't you think the pshat over here in this braisa is as follows: aver cotton de gadol, it has to be an amount that could be used for a small limb of an adult, and then or the braisa is saying or the aver gadol shel cotton ben yoimai, or a large limb of a child, of a baby even, that's a ben yoimai, but not a small limb of a small baby. So they said by Rabbi Yanai, no, that's not the pshat. Loi hachikam, it has to be read together. Shemen kedei losoch eve cotton shel cotton ben yoimai. The amount of oil used to anoint, to apply to a small aver of a baby that's a ben yoimai. It's not two separate things the Braisa is saying. Shall we say that this statement of Rabbi Yanai is an argument amongst Tanoim? Because it says in the Braisa as follows: Kidei shemen, kidei losoch eva cotton, amount of oil to apply to a small limb, the cotton ben yoimai, and the child is 1 day old. Divrei Rab Shimon ben Elazar. Rab Nosson says kidei losoch eva cotton, to apply to a small limb. So it's not exactly clear what their argument is. So my lav b'hakam ifligi. Don't you think that they're arguing about this point over here? That Rab Shimon ben Elazar savar, Rab Shimon ben Elazar's opinion is eva cotton, shell cotton. He's clarifying that it's a small limb of a small baby. That's what he meant to say when he said eva cotton, vi cotton ben yoimai. Rab Nosson savar, on the other hand, Rab Nosson is saying eva cotton. Only eva cotton, a small limb. He doesn't add the cotton ben yoimai because it has to be a eva cotton de gadol. Has to be a small limb of an adult. Or according to him, eva gadol de cotton. A large limb of a baby would also be enough of an amount. Aval eva cotton shell cotton ben yoimai loy. But as Rab Shimon ben Elazar said, that even a small limb of a baby, that not. So it would come out that Rab Yanai's statement that we're talking about, the amount of oil for a small limb of a baby, is a machlokes here. And says the Gemara loy, we can say really as follows: the kula alma eva cotton, the cotton ben yoimai loy. It's possible that both of these Tanoim will disagree with Rabbi Yanai's interpretation of our Mishnah. If it's small enough only to be used for a small limb of a small baby, that's not going to be enough. The lesser the Rabbi Yanai, and none of them agree to what Rabbi Yanai said. And here the argument would be interpreted as follows: Rab Shimon ben Elazar savar eve cotton de gadol. Either it has to be the amount used for a small limb of an adult, ve'eve gadol de cotton, or for the amount used for a larger limb of a baby, cotton ben yoimai. Ki adadininu. They are the same. Either one would be okay, but not of a small limb of a small baby, like Rabbi Yanai said. Rab Nosson savar, and Rab Nosson's opinion is Eve cotton the gadol in the small limb of a gadol of an adult. That's an amount that's enough to be chayiv. Eve gadol the cotton ben yoimai loy. But a large limb of a baby that's a ben yoimai, which is a little bit smaller of an amount, that's what the argument is about. But everybody will agree that if it's a small limb of a baby, that won't be enough. So it would come out now that nobody agrees to what Rabbi Yanai said. What was the conclusion regarding this subject, regarding the pshat in the Mishnah, of how we learn the pshat of shemen kedei lasach eve cotton? So the Gemara brings another brayse, toshema. In another place it says the opinion of Rab Shimon ben Elazar, the Tanya Rab Shimon ben Elazar oimer, shemen, the amount of oil to be chayiv, kedei lasach eve cotton, shel cotton ben yoimai. The amount used for a small limb of a baby that's ben yoimai. So we clearly see that this was the pshat in Rab Shimon's opinion, Rab Shimon ben Elazar's opinion. So we have a source for Rab Yanai's interpretation of our Mishnah.